Running Wild with Christine, Sex, Success, and Other Slippery Rabbit Holes. Episode 6 on Adultery, Desire, and Conscious Relationships. Hi everyone, welcome to Running Wild with Christine. As always, I'm Christine Wild, author of Just Bad Timing. This podcast is a safe place to ask a bunch of questions and try and answer them and talk around some rabbit holes with some cool people. So today I'm here with Anita Cassidy to discuss her book, Appetite, which is about food and sex, two appetites in the modern world that the modern world stimulates, but also the ones we're expected to keep under control. But what happens when we don't? So, of course, Anita and I got along, so I'm very happy that she's here today.
Hey, Christy, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you, too. So how about we start with a bit of background on your book, Appetite, and what it's about and how you got to write it.
Yeah, I started writing Appetite in 2013 as part of National Novel Writing Month, where across the world, people gather together and individually to try and write 50,000 words in a month.
Yep.
So the story started then and was very much kind of inspired by my thinking and concerns about eating and my young family, but also my increasing frustration and concerns around my marriage. I was processing, I think, in Appetite, a whole set of concerns and thinking about how to manage and navigate monogamy in a marriage and a long-term relationship. Issues that, to be honest, at the time I really didn't know enough about to kind of make sense of, but which actually writing the book really helped me get my head around, because by writing the book I did some reading, and it was the reading that got me to make John Barker and got me talking to people like you about these kind of conscious choices around the book, relationships.
The book follows three characters, but one of which is most relevant to our conversation today, who is the character of Naomi. So do you want to tell us a bit about Naomi?
Yeah, Naomi is a late 40-something mother of a teenage boy. She's just started a new job, and like a lot of us, she thinks that making that change will make her happier. Yeah. But she's, even a month into her new job, she's frustrated and bored and just feels like she's on a treadmill doing the same old, same old. She's met a friend at work, Carla, and through her met someone called Mike, who is Carla's husband. Yeah. But someone that Naomi starts chatting to through social media, and the conversations late at night while she's working from her home office become increasingly intimate and exciting. And from there, she embarks on an affair. And I think it's a very common story. It's a story that people recognise, that idea that you're sat by yourself with your phone, your screen, your laptop, and, conversations can start, and being hidden behind a screen can often give us the freedom to say things and communicate things that maybe we wouldn't normally.
Yeah. I mean, I loved reading her. It wasn't as polarizing for me of a reading experience as it might have been for some of your readers.
Yes. The reviews have been very kind of black and white, really. Very strong reactions from the bloggers that read the book at the start of the year. People either really get her and are like, yeah, actually, you really nailed that idea, that the excitement, but also the fear. Yeah. And she does feel at one point like she's doing it all, like she's being the perfect wife. She's supporting her husband, she's supporting her son, and she's getting something for herself. That sense of the affair giving her the energy she needs to do the rest of her life properly and better. But then you've got, on the other side, that very strong reaction of how could she, how dare she, how is it, how could she be so selfish to behave like this?
And I think that's a major pointer to where we're at in society regarding, faithfulness and monogamy, and how we think about adultery and our own personal identity and our desires in a very binary way.
Absolutely.
And I think that's sort of what we're here a little bit to challenge today is this idea that, what you do defines you as a person, and how you think about a particular issue defines you as a wife or as a mother, or all those sort of labels that we choose to describe people that are sort of fixed in time and they have to be a certain role.
Absolutely. I think, think about Monica Lewinsky, for example. She's forever been the girl that did this.
Yeah.
Too many people fix on a mistake or fix on a certain point in time and a certain set of behaviours in a certain context, and then decide that that's the person for forever, without considering how and why they got there, but also context of the scenario, and also the possibility for change in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's what you were also saying when we were chatting earlier on about the character Naomi, is that people don't look at where she is in her life in general and what led her to make the decisions that she's making along the story of, like, this is a reaction to something that is happening. It's not
Absolutely.
necessarily the healthiest reaction, but it is a reaction that led...
It's a reaction to a set of circumstances, and the circumstances, I think, are very familiar to anyone that's been married for a long time or been in a very long-term committed relationship, especially one that's involved raising a family and working full-time, which is that sense of becoming reduced to a certain role and not having all the other parts of yourself being seen. He's frequently, she makes plans to leave the house, and Naomi's talking about being out of the house, and no one notices her leaving, basically. She's like, I'm going to... Everyone's like, yeah, whatever. They're all busy doing their own thing. And I think too many women, and men as well, often feel that, in the context of a long-term relationship, they stop being seen as all the things they are. They just get reduced down.
And maybe even forget about certain parts themselves until something jolts them back to that.
Absolutely, which is what happens with Naomi in terms of, the conversation sparks a kind of a sexual response that she's surprised by. Because she's stopped thinking of herself as a sexual person. Essentially, she's put the sexual part of herself aside for many complex reasons, which you obviously can read about more in the book.
Yes.
And I think that happens to a lot of us, especially when we have a family. Is that decision? You're like, I'm a mother now. I'm a father now. This is my responsibility. This is my role. And you forget about the other parts of yourself, and it can often be meeting someone new or a chance encounter, a chance conversation that then can re-spark those things.
I mean,
then what happens is like, wow, what do I do now? Which is where you're kind of in the social scenario. It's very black and white. It's like, well, don't do it. If you do it, you mustn't ever tell anyone. But if you do, you're a terrible person. You're really caught in a bind. It's like, well, I have these feelings, but where do I go with them?
Exactly, and it's funny that I actually can relate to that, and I've not been in a very long relationship or had kids, but there is a point in my book where I've been with Liam for a while, and we're a little set in our ways and bored with the routine, and we're not having sex, and if you've read any of my writing, you're like, who is that person?
Absolutely. That's not you. You've lost a part of yourself, actually. You're losing something that was important to you, and you don't really know how and why it's happened.
Well, I did know how. I was dating someone who had a physical job, so he was always tired or like strained muscles and da-da-da, so there was always some kind of excuse. Like, it's not like it wasn't a conversation that we were having, but it was just like, for me, it became this like, well, in the name of my love for him kind of thing, in the name of like, and I can imagine how much bigger of a burden it is when you're a mother and you have other bigger things, but still, I think that this is the interesting part about starting to write about those topics and write about those feelings, is that, like it leads you to research after, and then you become more aware of those patterns in yourself, and it leads you to a broader conversation, and people like Esther Perel and, people who are challenging the norm of how we think about relationships and how we think about cheating.
Yes. And I think you're right. It's interesting what you said right at the start there about the fact that you hadn't been in that relationship for a terribly long time. And I think, again, that's a common misconception that you only want to, or that you only experience desire for other people when you've been with someone else for a very long time. I mean, certainly my experience of feeling my feelings shift around my desire levels and thinking, actually, this, that and the other were really only probably 5 or 6 years into my marriage, really. And you're talking about maybe an even shorter period than that. And I think it's okay. I mean, I think someone like Esther Perel is really saying, your desire levels are your desire levels. And it's okay to feel that way. The important thing is to think about how you then deal with those feelings.
Yeah.
And do you go down the typically kind of unconscious monogamous route of denial. This isn't happening. Ignore. Like you said, kind of, my relationship, I love them, and I've got all these complex responsibilities, and I don't want to do anything I shouldn't do, or been told I shouldn't do. So you've got that kind of option, or you've then, by repressing, you then potentially create that scenario where the hidden away thing just grows and grows and grows.
And was that your experience? Because you're now very focused on the conscious relationship dialogue, and that's the work that you're doing mostly now. How did you get to that?
Yeah, I think by making lots of mistakes, essentially. And I think it's just kind of like tons of mistakes. And, I'm not saying that thinking thoughts and speaking to people and behaving in ways that one regrets later are ideal, but I think sometimes you are going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
You are going to make mistakes, and actually it's the mistakes that sometimes
help you grow.
You need to do. And it was a chance conversation I was having with someone I'd met, who then basically turned around to me and said no. I was like, I really want to talk to you. I really want to talk to you about how I'm feeling. And he's like, actually, no, you're married and this isn't happening. And I think for me, it was that person that then said, look, have you thought about opening things up? And it was that conversation that led me to make John Barker.
Yeah.
And that conversation and reading that book that led me to talk to Mark about opening our relationship up, because all of a sudden I could see how I could navigate my marriage long term.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I had a framework, a map almost, that led me to what I hoped would be a long term future with Mark, but one that accommodated and allowed for that desire for other experiences and other things in my life. And I think, for a lot of people, that's a really successful model. I know lots of people that are in very long term committed monogamous relationships that just have those play partners and other casual encounters that do just keep, that they're very open and they're talked about all the time, but they just kind of keep that kind of the boogeyman, of kind of sexual desire and kind of attraction and interest, out in the open.
Yeah, but I think that's the key, is the communication piece. I think that you said to me you said something to me the first time we talked about having conversations about when problems start or when it ends, when your relationship is in a good place, and sort of opening that conversation as to, well, these are the typical sort of like, or not typical, but these are my or yours traumas or problems or issues or fears, and having that conversation early on when you're in a good place. That's like the crux of it.
That's the key to kind of conscious monogamy, but also conscious relationships full stop, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's to have those conversations really early on. Why wait till you're 5 years down the line to have a conversation about how you feel around monogamy, how you feel about differences in desire levels? I think it's about sitting down, like you say, and saying, right, these are my previous experiences. These are common problems that, we know that people in long-term relationships, especially if you've got plans to live together, that in particular, I think can take a real toll on the ability to really see each other properly.
Yeah.
And if you're choosing to have a family. And so to put those issues on the table from as early as possible and create that safe space and that respectful, considering, compassionate space to talk about those things and say, look, how would we feel if one of us got sick? How would we feel if one of us really, couldn't have sex for a while or didn't want to, or wanted to try something the other person didn't feel comfortable about? I think it's about saying, doing the what ifs really on, while you do have that real kind of deep connection that I think gives you the energy and the space to have the more difficult conversations in a way.
Yeah. When you're discovering each other, I always find it fascinating. I think this is sort of the excitement of the life that I'm leading right now, is I get to have glimpses into people, because I'm traveling and I meet these cool people, and I have these intense conversations because we both know I'm leaving the next day, so there's no risk, there's no fear, so you really uncover yourself, and you have these deep conversations, and I'm like, how fascinating would it be if we could actually feel that free in the sort of scripted life that you feel like you're leading sometimes, and just sort of open up that space and be like, as much as you're having a deep and meaningful conversation about, I don't know, space and whatever the topic may be, have the same conversation about yourself and the relationship with each other, which can be such a scary and daunting thing, but it doesn't have to be.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's the fearlessness, because what you're describing there is that kind of freedom, that knowing you don't have to see that person again gives you a level of freedom and perhaps openness that most people just don't bring to relationships that they are, kind of committed, massively invested in.
Yeah.
It's almost, actually, I think there's a real argument there, isn't there, for kind of having the very difficult and deep conversations fairly early on, because they just become harder to have the more you are invested in something.
Yeah, and I think that
ideally that wouldn't happen. Ideally you just have an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all treat each other and talk to each other as if it was the last time we saw each other? Because ultimately, again, without sounding too kind of serious, so it could be. It could be. So many stories you read where a friend of mine recently, kind of a partner's become very ill, and again, they're my age, mid-40s, and you're like, this stuff happens.
Yeah.
And actually, how wonderful would it be to be in a relationship where you're having the conversations, the kind of fresh, interesting, engaging, open, fearless conversations all the time?
Yeah.
I think it takes work and it takes practice, but I think the sooner you can start that, the better.
Exactly, and I think it's actually a practice in the absence of judgment, like in terms of the listener.
Absolutely right, yeah. It is that real openness to seeing. And I wrote about this recently. It's that idea that actually someone desiring someone else, if we're talking specifically about kind of sexual desire in monogamous relationships, desiring someone else isn't a criticism of the person
in front of you. Yeah.
Partner. It's not like I don't desire you anymore, I desire this. It's like, actually, I still desire you, but oh my goodness, no, I also really love the idea of spending a bit more time over here, or I'd love this kind of experience that would involve another person or a different type of person.
Yeah.
And it's not, it sounds harsh, but sometimes it's not about you.
No,
sometimes it is about, just something new and interesting and different. And it doesn't have to be a threat to the relationship, especially if it is talked about.
Exactly. And I feel like we're coming to a point where it's okay where I think in the mainstream conversation we're more and more aware that no one is responsible for your happiness but yourself. And so I think including that in that kind of conversation of saying, yeah, I'm in a relationship and I want to make you happy, but only you can make you happy, and realizing that, those lacks are not always, are often not from the person in front, but from your inner self. And so that conversation is easier to have if you know that the person in front of you can have that openness, and you can only know that if you've had those open conversations in the first place.
Definitely.
Is that
isn't it? It's a challenge to maintain that in the day to day, I think, and that's where it's like creating that space and time. Again, creating habits from early on about talking about the relationship and all the different aspects, but it's about maintaining that habit despite the busyness, the stresses and strains, and making sure that you don't ever lose sight of why you're there and what you're doing this for, which is, to not make someone else happy, but to kind of maintain your own joy and connection and understanding of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And is that sort of, are those conversations, I guess, with Mark and later on, what led you to sort of steer away from monogamy in your own personal life?
I think for me, reading, Rewriting the Rules, and also The Ethical Slut, I just don't think I'd ever come across a set of ideas that so adequately and perfectly captured me.
Yeah.
I was a bit like, oh my goodness, I think this is this is the framework I've been looking for, and this explains to me, this makes me make sense to myself. Yeah. So very much kind of choosing to be polyamorous, choosing kind of a consciously ethical, non-monogamous kind of relationship setup just made absolute sense to me. You know, it was never something that Mark wanted for himself.
Yeah.
And very much the kind of the communication skills that we developed and the understanding we both developed about ourselves and each other. You know, whilst the openness brought us closer together for a long time, that first year and a half, but, you know, it did bring us closer together. It did teach us lots about how to talk to each other. But in the long run, you know, he very much wanted a monogamous partner. And I think he's choosing that very consciously now. And I think he's seeing someone else. And they've had those conversations early on because of the experiences he and I went through. And I think that's a really powerful thing to be able to say, actually, I'm moving forwards, having developed the skills and the ability to have those kind of more difficult conversations with a new partner, which is exciting.
And I think that also it's important to underline as well that when you, like, whatever conscious decision you are making about the relationships you're having, that doesn't make the relationship any easier.
Oh, gosh, no. I mean, again, this is a classic thing, isn't it? People are looking for, if I just pick the right framework at the right time and do the right kind of, have the right kind of combination of people and things, then everything's going to be safe and happy and perfect. And there is just no such thing.
Yeah.
There just is no such thing. You know, there is no relationship set up that gets you out of difficult conversations.
Yeah, and I think...
Apart from that very unconscious monogamy where stuff just sits in the background, doesn't get talked about, we all kind of default to our kind of passive-aggressive, codependent behaviours that, you know, that our parents taught us so beautifully, having been raised in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, I've had to unlearn so much of that stuff myself in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, further than unlearning, I'm battling it because my parents are unlearning it as we speak, or sort of like, at least just realizing that those are learned behaviors, which is, you know, step number one. And so it's really funny because listening to Esther Perel, I was like, yes, actually, you might be perfectly happy and still, like, want the forbidden and want the secrets. And so I think you said something interesting about that context, even within a polyamorous relationship, of that, you know, being sort of...
Oh, yeah, the allure of the cheating, the excitement of adultery. Because, again, I think it's something that appetite captures, and it's something that people really feel uncomfortable talking about because it can be exciting.
Yeah.
You know, it's exciting to have a secret. It's exciting to do things that you know you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, my partner, Andrea, was seeing someone earlier this year who talked to him about a fetish they had for being the mistress.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. It was really interesting that you could build up a kind of a real sense of sexual excitement around the idea that you are someone's secret.
Yeah.
And again, that then raised a very interesting conversation for me in the context of my incredibly honest and open polyamorous relationship with Andrea, where I'm like, actually, what that story you've told me has made me think is like, what would you do if somebody asked you to keep them a secret from me?
Yeah, exactly.
And, we sat there. It was really interesting. We sat there, and he's like, and his reaction was just wonderful. He's like, "Oh my God, never! I wouldn't ever do that to you." And he was so sincere and kind of instant in his reaction that I just didn't doubt him for a second. But, you know, I've met other people who are also in open relationships who've confessed to me that they miss cheating.
Yeah.
You know, they've got the permission now, and it
takes it away.
Them in particular, and again, I think it's a very personal thing.
Yeah, of course.
The sex with other people has kind of lost its spark a little bit because it's not kind of forbidden anymore.
Yeah, so. And I think that's such a funny, because I wish that I had heard, that I had sort of thought about it in this way when I was writing Just Bad Timing, because in chapter 15 I talk about being the person that someone cheats with.
Yes, I remember reading that part, definitely.
Yeah, and so I was sort of grappling with it in my own head, being like, oh, like, why am I choosing to do this knowing that he's in a relationship? It's not like I didn't know. It's not like someone sprung it on me. I'm like actively choosing to do something quote unquote wrong. And actually now I'm realizing that a lot of it was the turn of being the secret and of being that person that someone was willing to do the forbidden thing for.
Yes.
And I think that's sort of an understated value to that in terms of like your self-esteem, even however perverse or you know, there's not a right term for it, but wherever that's coming from, that idea that I am worth this transgression.
Absolutely. There is something really powerful about that. And I think, again, like we talked about earlier, bringing this stuff out into the light, you know, that's the way to deal with it. There's no point denying, there's no point pretending and denying that for some people, having an affair is deeply exciting.
Yeah.
And also that it can really spark a lot of personal change, a lot of personal growth, that those experiences and conversations with someone different and in a, you know, kind of in a space where you can be perhaps the parts of yourself that you've not been before, you know, new parts of yourself, but also forgotten or, you know, half forgotten parts of yourself. I think it, you know, it can really spark a lot of change and a lot of growth. And again, Esther Perel talks about that in The State of Affairs.
Yeah.
You know, that actually for some people, meeting someone new while they're in a relationship can be a way of getting away from an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
It can give them the energy they need to make changes, perhaps around their diet or other negative behaviours. And I think, you know, again, it's just too easy to reduce it to good, bad, you know.
Yeah.
When actually it is so much more nuanced than that. It's so much more complex.
It is, and it's so complicated because I even like now I'm like I remember writing like, oh, but he then became unworthy to me because he cheated with me. So I was like, that makes you an asshole. And
that's transference, isn't it? That's your classic kind of I've gained what I needed to gain in terms of my self-esteem by feeling like a treasure that someone's taken a risk for, and now what I'm going to do is kind of take the good bit and then throw the guilt and the shame and the kind of awkwardness right back at the person.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, you did this.
A lot of times when people are cheating, there's counselors and psychologists talk about splitting, whereby they will basically, people will create very complex reasons why it's the fault of their partner that they're cheating. And I think, again, it's about seeing the psychological tricks that your mind will play on you to justify how you're behaving.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything's necessarily right or wrong, but I think it is important, like you said before, to really look at why you're doing something. You know, what are you getting off on? You understood in yourself. We understand now perhaps what you were doing then. But I think if you're in a situation where you're doing things that are potentially harmful to you or your partners in the long run, it is important to look at why.
Yeah.
And just take that step back and think, actually, do you know what needs aren't being met? And again, I read something wonderful in the Nonviolent Communication book about the fact that mistakes are just wrong paths to get your needs met. They're just wrong paths to getting your needs met. So basically, you've got something you need, but you're going about getting it in the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of
that's what an affair is. It's about, it's about that.
And I think that's the funny part of saying that we need more communication, but I think it comes also from this like inner communication with yourself of being like, and I'm not talking it's easy or instant, but like the fact.
No, but that honesty with yourself about what you need and how you're feeling, and that's really hard.
Yeah, it really is, and I think it's easier now, and I think the writing process helps because you sort of cannot run from it. You're like, oh, well, I wrote this, like. Yours was fiction, but mine was non-fiction, and I couldn't, I reread the stuff that I wrote, and I was like, oh my God, that's what that was.
Yeah. Well, you just process it on a different level, I think, aren't you? And by going over and over it, certainly I saw, you might remember this yourself from the editing process, but, it's a long process. Yeah. So you're going over your material again, and again. And by doing that, every time I went back to Naomi's story, to David's story, to Matthew's, I would see more and more things that I'd basically hidden from myself, about myself in that story. And I think there was an interesting piece online recently about whether journaling can actually be more valuable or certainly not maybe more valuable, but as helpful as seeing a therapist. Yeah. And I think there is something about the writing process, wwhether it's journaling and blogging about your actual life like you did, and with your book, Just Bad Timing, or fiction writing like I did, where you process things in a very different way. And I think it can be a really powerful way of beginning to get that kind of real understanding about yourself and what you need and want.
Yeah, and I think it's like a legitimate space for you to have the time to have that conversation with yourself, which you might not get in other settings. And there's probably lots of other ways to do it. But like that process for me was like, oh yeah, I'm writing, but actually no, I'm really just sitting and talking to myself about myself and giving myself the time to have that introspection. That I might not have the reflex of just going towards in everyday life.
I agree. And I think actually, perhaps apart from a therapy space or some sort of counselling space, I'm not sure there is any other place.
Yeah.
Writing where you can be completely honest.
Yeah.
You know, you're safe and you can be honest. And like, no one ever has to see it, but you see it. And I think it's a big first step on the path to kind of really becoming kind of aligned and congruent, your insides and your outsides.
Yeah.
Like on the paper or on the screen, you start seeing the gap between who you think you are and what you think you want and the reality that's sitting underneath the surface.
And on a third level, what you're actually presenting and what that's inviting, which is like a completely different image still.
Yes, exactly. Like Naomi and the kind of chattering online, it's like actually how, you know, she is perhaps actively seeking something without realizing it. And I think, again, so many of us kind of behave in very unconscious ways.
Yeah.
Interacting with people we've not met before and perhaps encouraging things in a way that we don't realize. It's interesting.
And I think that sort of goes back to the deep conversations at the beginning where you're like, I'm realizing that I'm saying, well, I think it's also due to the book that I feel like I don't really need to have secrets anymore because I've like sort of given a lot of them out already. But I'm saying a lot of things that I never would have dared to say in the past to other people that are close or not so close to me. And I think that sort of consciousness now of different things that I'm getting from different people is so beneficial because I am having more conversations like yours, like the one we're having, with people in my life that I before would have very pigeonholed into, oh, with them I speak about this, and with them I speak about that. And
that's okay.
And so now the consciousness of just being more like, okay, well, yeah, it's not because...
All the parts of yourself. So being more of the different bits of yourself with more people.
Yeah.
Interesting. And again, because this brings us back to often people have affairs or reach out to other people because, you know, this idea that one person can meet all your emotional, intellectual and physical needs is becoming increasingly challenged, I think, by individuals, mostly because it doesn't really suit most people. I think certainly it can suit some, and if it suits you, that's amazing.
Yeah.
If you're in that kind of relationship, that's wonderful. But I think certainly for me, you know, as a bisexual woman, you know, there are certain physical needs of mine that can't be physically met by a male partner or a single female partner. So there's that one thing. But I think there's also just the fact that, you know, we don't just have one friend. I know it's an easy analogy to give, or we don't just have just one child. You know, I just kind of, you look at just the complexities and the different things that different relationships can bring. But the more of you can be with all of those people, the better, because then you're more kind of congruent all the time, then aren't you? You're more fully present if you're not having to kind of mentally shuffle, oh, well, I don't talk about my kinks with this person. I don't talk about the poly stuff with that person because it makes me a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'm writing with this person, but I never talk about social media.
It's so exhausting.
Edit yourself. It's exhausting.
Exactly. And I think that it's actually furthered by the society that we live in, this idea that, you know, that's actually fairly modern, that the world is your oyster and you should be individualistic and want to fulfill all your own personal needs and like live the life before you sort of dedicate yourself to something else. I think that's becoming super contradictory with like the continuity of like the assumption of monogamy, because you're like, wait, I'm supposed to travel and meet all these people and see as many places as possible, but then I'm supposed to just go back and be one person in one place for one role.
Really interesting. I think a lot of it, I've given this a lot of thought, because it's this idea that actually, and it's fixed to ages as well.
Yeah.
In your 20s, you are meant to do this.
Yeah.
You're meant travel, meet people, have fun, explore different sexual experiences.
Yeah.
Then when you're 30, you look for someone to settle down with, and you have a family,
Yeah.
and you commit to one person for the next 50 years, and you're only allowed friends that look and sound a bit like you do.
Yeah.
And you reduce your kind of social environment to maybe a room in a house
Yeah.
where you're sat on the floor covered in sick for a lot of the time. And it's just like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think for me, it's very limiting as well. I think it means that a lot of people, if they haven't met someone in their 20s, they're maybe not having fun in their 20s. It's like, well, this is my fun decade and I'm not having any fun. So what's going to happen to me in my 30s and 40s? It's like, no. You can have fun in your 40s. Yeah. I'm here. I trust you. Trust me, you can. And it's such a shame that we've got these very strong messages about what you can and can't do at certain ages. Mm-hmm. But I think, people like yourself, people like me, more and more people are turning around and going, actually, do you know what? I'll make sure that the needs of my significant people, including my children, are being met. Their emotional and physical needs are being met. But I can still, explore sexually, explore intellectually, kind of be out, be having interesting experiences, do a bit of traveling. Those things don't go off the table completely.
And conversely... Yeah, conversely, I've had the opposite conversation where they're like, even if it's people I don't really know, like friends of family and stuff like that, like, oh, so you wrote a book, what's it about? I'm like, it's my life, it's my life story, ... And they're like, oh, but what do you have to say at 28? How could you possibly have anything to say at 28?
Interesting. I think, I found this, Andreas found this when he and I met when he was in his late 20s, and he embarked on the non-monogamous kind of poly lifestyle in his late 20s. Mm-hmm. And the amount of people that turned around to him and said, oh, you just haven't met the one yet. You've not really you're not really in love. You're not really in love with Anita. You don't really know what love is because you haven't met the one. And I think, increasingly people know that this idea of the one is crazy. Because, again, what happens to the person that meets the one? I mean, again, I've known as you get older, you collect so many sad stories. And I know someone who, whose partner died in a climbing accident within weeks of them getting married.
Oh, my goodness.
What do you say to someone like that? Oh, well, you've had your one, sweetheart. I'm sorry. That's you now. That was your one. I mean, when we actually start living lives and hearing the real stories of other people's real lives, we start realising just how nonsensical and limiting these kind of narratives are that society's given us. These fairy tales, essentially, about one person for all time. It's the myth of the one ring, isn't it? The one true ring which binds us all, and it's the one true God.
And we talked about this with Amy too, like the myth of the one key for the one door, and and for me, I think that was the important part about writing nonfiction and writing the truth, like my truth. I'm sure some people in the book will be like, that's not how it happened.
At this point in time, and you acknowledged, I remember talking before, and you were talking about how your thinking's changed, how you understand yourself better now. Yeah. And you look back and think, oh, you can see how much you've moved from those positions. And I'm the same. Me at 28, Mark and I were talking about our marriage. I'm like, if you ever cheat on me, I'm cutting them off. You balls it off. Yeah. And I'm being so black and white about it, which meant that when I did experience feelings for other people and desire for other people, 6-7 years later, it was just devastating for me.
Hard,
because my real experience was so challenging. Mm-hmm. The narratives that I'd absorbed and kind of internalized, and that I was being kind of constantly reinforced from the social and cultural environment, and it was just literally devastating. And I think you just have to start looking at these things and questioning them. You're questioning your own story, but also the ones you're being told.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was sort of, I had a hard time finishing my book. I was like, how do I end it?
Of course, because it's an ongoing thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's no big lesson learned. There's no guy on a horse. There's no, revelation. There's no like, oh, this is, there's just, well, I've learned a few things that I don't like. There's still
And also, you've seen some parts of yourself that you don't necessarily like, and you've seen some bits of yourself that you love and you want to see more of. Yeah. And I think that's why, because I've got the 3 different strands of story in Appetite, I was very... Obviously, there's one character that had to have the happy ending. He's the one that does all the work, and he's the one that everyone loves. Yeah. And always about... And that was always fair enough, because it's there to be loved. But with Naomi,
I love the ending. I don't want to spoil it,
the
but
way leaving it open like that, you're
Yeah.
just a bit like, what does happen next
Yeah,
to someone?
yeah, yeah.
What does happen next? And I think actually the second book that I'm working on right now is very much about what happens next in
Yeah.
terms of a man who's cheated in a relationship,
Yeah.
and the impact in his family,
Yeah.
and their choices at your age, really. So they're in their late 20s now,
Yeah.
and they've come from a broken marriage.
Yeah.
And they've seen behaviour, and actually, what impact does that have? On the generations passing down.
Yeah.
How do those transgressions and those behaviours, even if you think they're secret, how do they then impact on your family and on the broader kind of unit there?
And I think that's a big and important question. Like I'm a child of divorce. And it's funny, I say this in the book, I'm like, when I meet someone and even when I'm really, 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 really in love and desperately blind about it, the question isn't, oh, will we end up together forever? The question is, can I really sustain a forever relationship with the father of my children after we're divorced? That's still like the frame of thought that I'm working off of. So
Yeah.
we need to start having those conversations, because like the family structures are changing, and our education is changing, and I think we're not having enough of the conversations that will go like, okay, so now this is the experience we have, this is the experience from the family, this is the ones we're having as an individual, and how does that impact what we want in the future?
I think you're right, and I think having those conversations early on, when you are feeling loving and becoming more vulnerable around someone, and saying, actually, how does this look later?
Yeah.
And I think it's something that Andrea and I do. Andrea and I talk about change and the possibility of change in our relationship all the time.
Yeah.
And I know that Mark and I did a lot of work together in terms of making sure that our co-parenting relationship, now that we've separated and we're going through the divorce period, divorce phases, they're really positive. That we basically kept all the bits of our relationship that work. We get on really well.
Yeah.
We co-parent well. We're happy to talk about certain things. We share very similar values on core things around children and on our sort of lifestyles in terms of healthy eating and activity and reading. And I just think that's what you have to focus on, is those it comes back to values. And it's basically like, what do we share?
Yeah.
If we're going to consciously commit to a long-term relationship with each other, and if we're going to consciously commit to the project of a home or a family, then what are the core things that we will always bear in mind, even if our feelings for each other change.
And I think that's sort of like the bottom line, and I think we can sort of start to wrap it up around this, is the idea that you always have those common points, and if we talk more and we find an effective way of communicating, we can always find a way back to some empathy, and that at the core of the relationships around you. And even if you're disappointed and angry and like the strong quote unquote negative feelings are still there, but that pathway to an empathetic space is like the only solution I can think of to those changes that we still haven't figured out how to work around.
Yes, I think at the end of the day, we don't know what the future holds.
Yeah.
For any, and I think by constantly bearing in mind that the future's not promised, and that actually we have just got now and the immediate future of now, and making sure that we kind of commit to the best in each other, and commit to always seeing the best in each other and in ourselves, even when we're making mistakes and even when things get tough.
Yeah.
And, kind of committing to that kind of conscious communication and considerate and compassionate kind of empathy with each other as human beings.
Yeah.
Doing the most difficult thing, which is relating to each other.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I don't think there's anything else left to say.
It's been really good to talk. It's been really good to talk about this, and hopefully your listeners have enjoyed
Yes.
You.
Yes, I'm really excited about this chat. So if any of you out there want to give us your 2 cents, your experiences, your questions, or think that we should have addressed something more or less, let us know on Twitter at ChristineWild _ and at
Anita Cassidy 76.
There you go. And we'll do our best to reach out and open up this conversation even further. So thanks a lot for listening, and speak to you all soon. Bye.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.